Hey, welcome to Lost in Our 40s, a podcast by women, for women, and about topical issues.
I
Today,
love
we have a guest. We have a guest. We're always very excited to have a guest. So, Marilyn, please tell us about you. Anything about you. Tell us, tell us.
it. Oh, Joanne, it's such a pleasure to be on your podcast, firstly. And in terms of me, we've known each other for a long time. Back in our career days, we won't say where. Um, however, yeah, what about me? I'm an African lady. I am Tanzanian by birth and have lived in a lot of countries. In the African continent, meaning Ethiopia, Tanzania, and then moved to Geneva, the US, the UK. And you know what? I'm so happy to be back in the African continent. I have been in Uganda and South Africa, and currently in Tanzania. So a big circle round.
That's
Um,
amazing.
Yeah, so that's me in a nutshell. But I'm a lawyer like yourself.
Yes.
I've worked for lots of organizations, matrices, companies that are global and in different roles. I'm not going to go into my CV. However, maybe Joanne, you want to pose me some questions? That's fine. But otherwise, that's me in a nutshell. I'm an attorney.
Yay. And this is so exciting because we had a plan. We had a plan about what we were talking about before we started the call. We were thinking more the corporate culture and things like that. But then we got to talking, and just before this, we were just talking about doing business in the African continent.
Hmm.
And we thought, look, because I also presently I'm Kenyan living in Sweden, have had some international exposure myself,
Mhm.
and there are different facets that and African experience as well. So I grew up in Paris when I was younger. Came back to Kenya, lived in South Africa, have moved around now in Sweden, have done some travel within Africa, and we just thought of that it's that doing business within Africa is probably something that not that many people think about. And we thought, why let's not have a conversation about it?
Mhm. Mhm.
So we were just having a story now, and where to start? Where to start? Maybe let's start this way. Cultural perspective.
Mhm.
it,
Yes.
it's such a big topic because unfortunately a lot of the rest of the world think of Africa as one country, and I've pulled hair trying to explain that no, each individual country is really, really different. So what have you picked up, like different cultural nuances in different countries? What would you comment on that?
Yeah. So I believe each African country have their own nuances. I have worked with Nigerians, like I said, East Africans. And when I say Nigerians, because they're a very specific market. I love Nigerians in the sense of they know who they are. They do not let people dictate who they are, and they let you know when you come to do business with them what they expect. Not to say that they are always right, but I love their stance in terms of this is who we are, this is what we expect, and let us know if you have something on the table to differ with us, and then we will look at that. But don't just come to us and say this is how things should be. There are other African countries that, you know what, they want to just close the deal. And I understand that as well, because sometimes they come with shareholders that say, listen, we do not need to adhere to the local perspective per se. However, we need to close this deal. And then in order to close the deal, we need to just listen to the person that's the head of that local engagement, and then let's make a deal. So I think what I'm trying to say is it depends on the market that you work with, how they eventually close an engagement with you as a business, whether it's a local business or a global business, and um, um, who has the 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 hand to say we refute this or we accept this. Um, South Africa, that's my experience as well. I love South Africa. I've lived there for over 7 years, actually. Not from 1 to 7, but I live in South Africa and I love that country. That said, South Africa is like the uh, Americas of the continent, and they pretty much, meaning South Africa, dictate what Africa is. And when it comes to the other countries in the African continent, they may have certain positions that they take in terms of, you know what, we don't do this in South Africa, and we don't think these countries are like South Africa. So, uh, in relation to the issues that South Africa has itself, that spreads over in terms of the other African countries. But um, let's not uh, let's not say that Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, Senegal, Botswana, Rwanda don't have their say in terms of what they would like to see happen in their own countries.
Yes.
So maybe a few things to say there.
Yeah. You've touched on many, many points, and I'll take you back to a couple of them. Something you said that I found quite beautiful to emphasize a little bit on is the person or the country or the regulator or the people who have the final say. And I mean, we've worked with you, so yes, I'll give my own example. I've had the experience of having something to be done and then having to turn back to the entities that want this thing done and emphasize the fact that there is sovereignty in states, that we cannot just go there and state that this is what we want done. And I'll take it outside. This is a really, really terrible example, but I'll give it all the same. And it's taking it outside of the corporate space. I had it when I was much, much younger. I don't know how old I was, maybe 19. I didn't have a passport, and I was traveling between Kenya and Tanzania. So these countries are bordering each other. I'm Kenyan, so what we needed at the time, we didn't need a passport, but I think they still do it. There's a sheet of paper that you can use to cross the border. So happy go lucky, I went and I lost it on the Tanzanian side. But I thought, I didn't think much of it. It's a sheet of paper. What's what's the big deal? So on my way back, I went to the border patrol people, and then I told them that I'd lost it. But then my manner was a little too flippant, if I'm honest. I didn't think much of it. It was a piece of paper. So because of my attitude, as opposed to because of the fact that I had lost the sheets, I was almost put in a holding cell, as in it became such a huge deal. And in my head, I was thinking, we are neighboring countries. People are probably running across the two, I at least am getting the paperwork. You should. But it was the view of my disrespectful stance is what then had gotten into into the bones of the people there. And once I did become apologetic, once I realized that, it dawned on me that this is actually a big deal. Even at that age, I realized that, look, you're in a different country. you don't have the paperwork that allows you to be there. Yes, they can tell from their records that you had it when you came in, but perhaps your stance, and there is, of course, in between countries, there's of course different kind of things. So there is in Kenya, there's more of a laid back view, probably. Having a flippant statement would not be taken as wrong as such, because of a more casual approach. And then our Swahili in Kenya is not that great. So again, maybe the way that I portrayed myself, the way that I communicated, was taken wrongly. And these are really cultural. In the end, I got out, don't worry. They let me out without much ado. But it's these cultural nuances that are important and might not be taken at the fore when dealing with international companies. So international companies might think, capitalism, we want this, that, this is how things work. But then spreading the understanding that there are cultural dynamics that come into play even while doing business within African countries is something that needs to be understood. What's your take on that? Yeah.
Yeah, so I hear you, and I think a couple of things. Um, yes, you were coming from a Kenya perspective and engaging with another East African country. However, those two countries are very, very different. Kenyans are, well, from my understanding, also akin to ensuring that their laws and regulations are adhered to. So that is the same for Tanzania. As much as we're East Africans, everybody wants to make sure that, we have the same dynamics. Yes. So us as the public, we can say, oh, it's just Kenya, it's just Tanzania, we're good. I mean, and I hear that, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
And even to the extent of the protocols, or should I say the regulations that adhere to, okay, yes, if you come from an East African country, well, at least from what I understand, to work in Tanzania, you can do that for a certain amount of time, but not forever, because we have these treaties that we have signed up to. Same for SADC as well. We can make sure that you can come into our country from a visitor perspective, but it's not to say that you can just chill in the country and work without a visa.
Yep.
So I do get it. We feel that we're affiliated with each other. However, there are laws and regulations that determine how we stay in a country, get into a country, stay in a country, and then what happens thereafter when the time has lapsed in terms of that engagement. Yes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
no, I was just going to say, because now taking it back to the business perspective, these are dynamics that the West isn't always aware of. I remember working at some point with a group that thought Africa was one country. And then even just this mentioning that's horrible in itself. But even just mentioning that Kenya and Tanzania next to each other, sharing a border, might have such different perspectives and ways of doing things, and are allowed to because they're different countries. Now talk about Senegal. It's a diverse place, and I think that's part of the message that the West gets to learn once they are trying to set up businesses in Africa.
Yeah, and I hear you on that. So, in terms of the other parts of Africa outside of East Africa, which you were discussing, meaning, the likes of Kenya and Tanzania and the bordering countries, as well as South Africa, and how we deal with each other. When it comes to West Africa, I mean, obviously we have to deal with their rules and regulations. However, we do know that we are fellow Africans. But how does this work? Which African is coming into the country? Remember, as Africans, we don't always have African passports. Remember that. Yes.
Mm,
So some people have African passports, other people have US passports, European passports, etc. And all those people are dealt with differently. And not to say that they're dealt with in a bad way. However, you know, um, you have to understand that there are laws and regulations dealing with individuals with different identities. And for example, in Tanzania, we don't have dual nationality.
mm,
Other countries do, you know. So, which nationality are you putting forward? And, you have to lose one nationality, at least in Tanzania, if you want to work in the country, for example.
mm,
You cannot say that, okay, I'm American and Tanzanian. You need to relinquish your Tanzanian passport. So, my point is, what are you doing in the country? Are you doing business? If you're doing business, you need to utilize the right passport to make sure that you are legally able to work there or engage in that country or support that country, etc. If you would like to relinquish one passport, which would be the foreign passport, you need to follow a procedure, and that's what's been happening. We are hoping that you know um, there will be a dual nationality process going forward that will enable people that are in the diaspora to come back and properly supports our beautiful nation, irrespective of, I mean, not irrespective, due to the fact that they are able to come in irrespective of their dual or triple nationality. That would be an amazing thing.
mm,
Listen, what I would say with that is maybe you can put some restrictions on, okay, fine, you can't own land here, or some other restrictions, but let's get our people back in that are very capable in various respects, whether it's being doctors, lawyers, landscapers, architects, you know etc., to be able to support the economy, to make sure that we have our diaspora that feel comfortable in terms of coming back to our nation to build up our nation.
No, but really beautiful. And you touch on a very, very, very interesting point: brain drain. This notion of so many people leaving the continent and not necessarily feeling incentivized to come back, and how to touch it. So you have the experience, I have the experience, and I think even the people listening, you probably all know people who have left the country. And what you've touched on is one of the things that I think really affects the ability to come back. Another thing that happened in Kenya more recently is the question of taxation. That there was, I don't know if it was still there, but there was this notion of having an almost punitive tax on people who do want to come back. And I do think it would be really good to change the perspective to make it more attractive for people who are out there to go back home. I give you the example of Sweden. It gets very cold. So from that perspective, there are probably a lot of people of African descent here who'd be very happy to go back to their home countries. And these hiccups and these problems that these governments often, not often, but sometimes maybe just don't think about. So maybe just an invitation that I do believe that there are a lot of people who'd be happy to go back home. I'm sure that there is a lot of investment, but even beyond the investment, there is the knowledge and the know-how that can come back. So I think that's a really good point. Yeah. Mm, mm, mm.
I agree completely. And you know what? Let me tell you something. I mean, I don't know about other markets in the continent, but people would be more open to coming back to at least communicate their know-how, and then still know that they can go back to their, you know, their should I say, their other side, their secondary citizenship, and applying knowledge as and when, you know, um, um, there are opportunities to do so.
Absolutely. So, question. What, and maybe for people listening asking themselves, so you've traveled extensively. What
So
is
you.
what is the, like, the impetus to travel, or what is it that makes you believe that you'll be okay when you go wherever it is that you're going?
I think I've been very blessed to have lived in various countries. And when I say various countries, I'm not saying, oh, you know, the Europes of the world. I've lived in Tanzania, but I was a baby. I've lived in Ethiopia. I had a beautiful childhood. I've lived in Geneva. Amazing. I've lived in the UK. Yeah. But honestly, I've honestly been privileged to know the UK people, which I didn't know, and I didn't even understand their culture, but then eventually did. I've had the privilege of living in the US, in South Africa, in Uganda. Uganda, I said, my goodness, where am I going? And not because it's Uganda, because I was like, I've never been there. You know, I got an opportunity to be in Uganda and got a package, and they said, do you want to see it first before you take the package? I said, no, I'm just going to go with my heart.
Oh,
And you know what? It it was an amazing opportunity. And then eventually circled around to SA and ended up in Tanzania. But you know what? All these places have taught me not only to understand different cultures, but also to understand how do I, you know, kind of figure out how I need to adapt when it comes to not only my life, but also a professional life. You know what I mean? It's not that simple, because in a professional life, you know, you deal with all kinds of people. My life was different. I mean, I got pregnant in the end. When I circled around, I was like, oh my gosh, who's going to look after my kids? I'm working. But just the navigation in terms of a different place, a different culture, but also a different culture at work. And a different culture at work is very, very important. You need to understand
yep.
who is in front of you. Do you deal with them as you have dealt with others in other companies? I mean, I thought this would be an easy pot, meaning Tanzania, but if I can say so, it was my hardest
Aha.
role. It was my hardest role. And I was my Marilyn self. You know, we got to get this done. I don't want to hear excuses. We got to get these agreements forward. We've got this deal that we need to secure. What are you doing with, you know, with this X, Y, and Z? But other people are like, "Ah, I'm tired. You know, last night, I don't know what. In my head, I'm like, at first, that's what I was doing. I was like, excuse me, we all have issues. I go back to my kids, but then I had to. I had to simmer it down. I had to simmer it down to the point where, HR was like, well, we are not part of your culture. This is how things happen here. In my head, I was like, are you like,
I love your internal conversations.
yeah, I was like, okay, you know what? But I had to learn all of those things. But I think for me here in Tanzania was the hardest lesson. I mean,
Yeah.
I can deal with Nigeria. Nigeria, let me tell you, I go into a meeting, they're
Yes.
like, hey, you have come back. Mhm. So last time you told us these things, eh? Mhm. You think you think that you are commanding us. You are the servants. We are the masters. Huh? Forget it. Last time we were here, and she's looking around. CTO. Last time we were here, she goes, "Did we not walk out of this office? Huh? Let's just walk out." And then they walk out, and you're like, yeah.
I love Nigerians.
I'm telling you, I love them all. And then my best friend is Nigerian. So I just sat there. I was like, chill, guys. It's
This drama.
let them walk out. Last time we walked out and she stood up, all her men walked out with her big dress. And I said,
Oh, oh my
anyway.
God. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. No, that's really, really, really great. Actually, now that we're talking about Nigeria, and I don't know if I'm interrupting you, but I've noticed. So I went to Lagos. So Lagos is everything that anyone would think about Nigeria. So very busy, very active, very, everything going
Mhm.
on. Then one day I went to Abuja. Abuja
Yeah,
is to the north and
yeah,
is so chill.
they
It's so
are. They
quiet.
really are. They are.
And I was, is
They
this
are.
the same country? But I had a strange experience because being further to the north, it has much more exposure to Islam. So I was going there
Yeah,
for
because they
some,
have the Hausa people in the north.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I was going for some meetings, and then as a woman, ideally I shouldn't speak. And I was at a loss. Why
No,
am I
Abuja,
here
you're
if I
fine.
cannot speak?
Abuja, you can speak. In
So
Abuja, you can speak.
in Abuja, you're there fighting it out with everyone else to be able to have
Let
your
me
say.
tell you, in Abuja, you can speak, and that's where all the politicians are,
I
all
went to
that
Lagos,
stuff.
sorry. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you're fine. In Lagos, we all fight. We're all like on
We're
the
all
floor
here.
with each other. Yeah. In
Yeah.
Abuja, you can speak, but you're right. It's towards the north. So in the Hausa people are in the north. And let me tell you something. I would still rumble in the jungle.
For me, it was
Girl,
such
I need to have my girls in this house.
ah, because there were like hands you cannot shake. That it had a little. I think I hadn't sufficiently prepared myself for this. And I mean, we have Islam in Kenya, you have it in Tanzania. It was there, so it's not the Islam itself that's different, but it was this higher level of reserve that just took me back. And then that was again the realization that there are cultural perspectives, and I like something you said. You need to deal with the person who's in front of you.
Yeah.
And if this person in front of you, if this is their box, if this is where they come from, that like the handshake. I think it was a Friday, so maybe just before prayers, maybe just before going, already washed hands. So, and even I think there is the thought of handshake, shaking a woman's hand. There's a bit of that. So I could be offended. I have rights. This is wrong. This is not my culture. Or I could let it be, because then I understand that, look, I've come to your home. And I've
Yeah.
come to your home because there's something I'm trying to get out. So from that perspective, I need to be able to accommodate your expectations. I
Yeah.
don't need you to fit into my
No
worldview.
way. I hear what you're saying because I went there with a company and we were all shaking hands with various Muslim delegates,
This is
and
in Abu Dhabi.
um,
Abu Dhabi.
Abu
Yeah.
Dhabi.
Yeah.
I was
Okay.
in Abu Dhabi,
Mm.
and they shaked everyone except me, and it wasn't a black thing they didn't shake any woman's hands. Yeah, and you know what? I just said it's okay. But you know what? In the end, they chose. They said that they would like me to be part of the negotiations because I think I did a good job, even though I was a woman and they couldn't touch my hand.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was my perspective in terms of shaking hands, not with women. However, they were still amenable to engaging with women when it came to um, um, negotiations, etc. However, that was also a cultural dynamic for me because every man is being his hand is shaken, but I'm like, okay, I'm just like literally like this, and with my head covered and everything. When I say my head covered, I had a
Oh,
scarf.
yeah. You've reminded me. I went to the Sudan again for a negotiation. So, Southern Sudan, and there was that. I had to go like on a short notice, and then I had to look through my wardrobe to find appropriate clothes.
Exactly.
I tried to go shopping, and I just couldn't find like I think everything I
But
had
you
was.
know what? You just need a long dress, a long sleeve, and then like a scarf. That's what I do. Even in Tanzania, that's the issue here as well. When you go to government offices,
Mm,
let me tell you something. Someone said you're not going to get through this building. We had a tax issue. We went to see the tax director, and my skirt skimmed my knees, but I had a dress like skimming my elbows, and they said you're not going to get in here. But because I was so stressed to get in there, somehow I got in. It was fine. But then when I went to just do fingerprints for my visa, let me tell you something. They were like, H no. They were like, no, you better go get. And my driver had to go and get me a rented long outfit, which I had at home, just to get in to do my fingerprints. So,
yeah,
yeah, you know,
yeah. You must do what is
yeah,
required where you are. Yes.
absolutely. At first, I was
Absolutely.
like, really? And then, Marilyn, how she is. So, someone tried to, and you cannot wear tight jeans. So, this
Okay.
lady walked in with a tight jeans and a t shirt. I was like, are you letting her in? Because I'm going to go in too. And let me tell you something. This other guy was like, "Oh, we didn't let her in, so she doesn't come in." I was like, "Yeah." And
Yeah. For
not because
consistency.
I didn't want her to get in. I was like, "Don't mess with
The
me.
rules need to make sense.
Rules are rules, my friends."
Rules are rules. But let's take this somewhere else. Because you mentioned it in passing.
Can I take
Um,
this off? I'm hot. Eh?
hmm?
I'm
Sorry?
hot, Jackie.
No, no,
Mhm,
remove. It's all right. You've
mhm.
you've mentioned color because we were
Yeah,
mentioning that now these are things that might happen because of being a woman. But what about color? Because in all these places that
color of
we've
what? Our skin color.
skin, yeah,
Ah,
in all these places that we've been, how to recognize when it is some form of racism,
oh,
or
there's lots of that.
or if it is in your head. And let me explain. I had a friend, she was South African, a black South African girl, and she
Mhm,
was explaining to me the difficulty, part of the difficulty of her existence was that she was charged. You've been to South Africa, so the South African history with apartheid and all this,
mhm,
there's a huge historical burden that sits on the people in South Africa, and
mhm.
she felt uncomfortable because she felt that she would take anything that is said to her from a racial perspective. So because she was brought up in that environment, in that culture, she found it very difficult to navigate and understand when someone is just saying something as opposed to when there's a racial element to it. So she was telling me, from her perspective, I mean, I'm better off because the country I come from, Kenya, doesn't have that kind of duality that she had. So bringing this back here, and to carry on that question, I think I noticed that this is something possibly Also the American market, and it's good that you've been there. You can speak to it a little bit. I imagine that the African American perspective has this same kind of duality, because there can be a lot of messaging that comes in the media and that comes from everywhere that could be that is purposed to, be demeaning of the Black experience and the Black perspective. So how does someone sit there and then figure out, in this situation this person is being racist, in this situation they are not being, how to tackle that?
I think it's not that simple.
Yeah.
Um, I went to grad school in the US.
Uh-huh.
I went to George Washington University
Uh-huh.
to do my master's. Um, when I was there, we had a lot of engagements. People were amazing towards me. I don't know, maybe it's just my character or whatever it is. But when I say people, I mean white, black, Hispanics, whatever you call them. However, I felt more racism from my African American people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that they were, I don't even think they were trying to be racist. I got the feeling that they just haven't engaged with people of my caliber and my colleagues' caliber, because I was there with other Zambians, Francophones, that, we all had scholarships to study at that institution, so we were all very excited. I recall, so I was on a master's program, like with my colleagues that were coming from other African countries. Um, and I recall an individual saying, "Oh, I have never met an African like you. The Africans that I know are like this on Time magazine with their arm blasted off, sitting in a mine zone."
Ooh.
Yeah. So it's really good to see an African like you.
Ooh.
Then I would go to, which I didn't want to do because I'm not a sorority person. And that's the last thing I want to do because they all have their procedures and I'm just not that way inclined. I went to a meeting in my campus, and there were these ladies who were like, "Yeah, but light skinned girls, of course they're going to get the jobs because they're light skinned. They're more beautiful than dark skinned people." And I just sat there. I'm like, I said to my boy, because I went there with a friend of mine, I'm like, you know what? I'm not into this conversation. I don't want to uh, um, deal with this type of rhetoric because
Yep.
you can just get into trouble. So I said, I'm going to go because that's not true. Like, yeah, maybe it is true to some degree because I know even in our African continent, you know, light skinned women are maybe more revered for some reason. Even in the Asian community, I have my best friend, one of my best friends who is she's from Trinidad, but she's also from where is she from? Shimi. She's from she's Malaysian something, but it's like everybody wants to be lighter than light, and then even the Latinos or the I shouldn't call them maybe Latinos, but some people from Latin America are told that if you're darker skinned, you're not as, uh, up in the scale of individuals that should be recognized. So I get all that. And even I went to a boarding school with Nigerians, you know, um, a lot of Nigerians, they're like, "Oh, you are popo," meaning you are, a certain color. You are dark skinned. You're just black. I didn't get that rhetoric, but my point is I lived that and I assimilated that, but I didn't agree with that.
Yeah.
Do you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying to you?
Yeah.
So it's really complicated. It's really complicated.
I like something you've said. You've given audience agency to some extent. You get the choice to some extent. You someone can say
I don't
something.
like any of it.
Yeah, it doesn't have to affect you. Someone can say something. It doesn't have to affect you. You don't need to take it in. Yeah, and I
Yes.
think that's really
And that's
powerful.
what I do with my girls because I have mixed children. They're Danish Colombian mixed, but they don't even, they love, I mean, maybe because they're still children, they're nearly 5 next year, but they're like, Mommy, I want to be black like you. And it's like, it's so beautiful. But I don't even want them to say that, but I don't know why they even saying that. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? You
Mm,
are who you are. You just
yeah.
are who you are. Well,
Yeah.
however you came forth. Let me tell you something. Before they came through, I was in love with the most blackest of blackest man, Mandingo, beautiful, like
Yes.
Jamaican, Mozambique, and he was dark skinned. I wanted to have babies with him, but he didn't want to have babies with me. So you
Um,
know what? I moved on.
yeah.
So for me, I don't care what color you are, but I love the fact, I don't know why, that my babies say, Mommy, what color am I? I'm like, I don't know. They
Yeah.
like, do you think I'm peach? I was like, maybe. And they're
Yeah.
like, Mommy, what color are you? I said, I'm black. And then they're like, Mommy, we want to be black like you.
Aw.
So you know what?
That's
It is what
cute.
it is.
That's
But
really
you know
cute.
what? Who knows what happens going forward? But for now, like I love it. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. No, good, 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 good. I want to take us back into the continent. So, Senegal. You were just
Mhm.
talking about, and maybe this is going to sound, what do you call it when you're just putting everyone in a pot? Senegalese men, I found them so beautiful. All of them. When you're talking about putting these things and just adding them together and stirring the pot, ha, and then they talk to you, and then I was just happy, just looking and thinking, wow, this, yeah. So, what the impression I had of Senegal? I mean, a beautiful country as well. It was. I need to be honest. When I was going to Senegal, the image I had in my head
Mhm.
was of a desert. Why? Because I used to watch the Paris Dakar when I
Really?
was young. I know. I used to watch the Paris Dakar when I was younger, and there was just a lot of sand. So I got there, and then I was just beating myself up and thinking, "You're the African. You know better. You know better. How are you the one who's going to be thinking this?" Then I realized that maybe it's a conversation to be had. That even within even within the different African countries, we don't necessarily know that much about the other countries. I know that when we were young, we were really not taught much about Western Africa, other than the Kingdom of Old Ghana. So really old history. But beyond that, we didn't have too much information of what went on in the rest of Africa. So I think it's that invitation, and depending on where I've gone, I have been in different places, and I'll mention South Africa because I saw this here. I saw this there a lot, and it's partly part of what you said in terms of being the America of Africa, putting it in that context. So
Mhm.
not necessarily having the vision of the other African countries. And I was guilty, but have reformed. Have
Good.
reformed to the extent that, yeah, exactly. All these countries are really. I don't have to have been there, but I haven't been to Mali as an example. I haven't been to Mali, but at least now I know in my head that it's a real country. It's working. It has it has roads. It has this notion of what has been portrayed in the media on
Yeah.
all the African countries is absolutely not what is there. If you look at your own country, whichever country you're from, you will realize that there's a lot more going on there than is portrayed in the media. So onus on all of us to take that step of curiosity to find out what these neighboring countries are all about. Mm.
I agree with you, and I'm going to tell you off because you are a typical Kenyan. Yeah, because Kenyans remind me also of South Africans, and not to say that you're bad peoples, But because you have a certain infrastructure, a certain way of doing business, a certain mentality,
Yeah.
just like South Africans, you assume people, um, might be in the same direction as you. I have traveled through a lot of African countries. So Senegal is amazing. Ivory Coast used to be super amazing before their initial civil issues that they had at the time, but they're still a decent country. I have been to Central African Republic.
Have you? Wow.
Let me tell you something. If you Let me tell you
Yes.
something.
Yes.
Even when I went there to see my ex-boyfriend,
I love your life.
ex-boyfriend at the time, um, even his brother was like, qu'est-ce que tu fais dans what he said? He said this rat hole. Ce
Wow.
trou de rat. What are you doing here? I'm like, I'm coming to see your brother. And there was one flight in, one flight out at the time.
Wow.
Let me tell you, you can like literally jog across that whole place, within a few miles and you're done. But my
Yeah.
point is, it's not pretty, but there are beautiful people in there. There are beautiful places to visit there. You know, my point is every country is not going to be like a Kenya or like a South Africa or like another or Nigeria. Let me tell you something. Every country is different. However, there are how can I say, gems when it comes to some of these other markets. Rwanda. Have you been to Rwanda?
No. I
Rwanda
haven't.
is pretty cool. I mean, you drop something on the floor, let me tell you, you'll be arrested. You know what I mean? Um, where else can I say? Tanzania has come up a lot. Um, they
Tanzania
have,
is beautiful. I was there in
it's,
January.
it's absolutely gorgeous. This is my
Wow.
country. My kids love it. But my point
Wow.
is, in terms of living
Ah,
in this place, like, are there any issues? Of course there are, but at the same time, there are rules and regulations that must be adhered to. On the west side, Ghana. Have you been to Ghana?
yeah.
Yeah. So Ghana is not, I mean, is that a problem? Ghana is not a problem. I've been there.
I like Ghana. I
So
quite like Ghana.
yeah.
Yeah.
So my point is, there are some countries that people feel are the be all and end all of Africa, but let me tell you something. One needs to travel a little bit more.
And I do think in terms of places to live, I'd take this out and even take it into the to the global dimension.
Mm-hmm.
All these things you mentioned about all these places is really true about anywhere else in the world. I was in I was in DC, actually near your old school. I was in Washington DC earlier this year, and I took one bus ride too far in the wrong part of town, and I thought, ooh, this is
Let me tell
right.
you, I lived
Yeah,
in the ghetto of DC when I arrived in DC because I didn't have a place to stay. So
yeah,
I stayed with my friend who was in a, I don't know, I didn't even know where we were. Like, I was like, what the what? I was like, where are we?
yes,
And he's
yes.
like, yo, we got rental caps here. Sijui nina, nina, nini. I was like, okay, I need to find a place real soon. And I eventually got a place. And you know what? Thank God, because I was on a scholarship. Because other people don't have those means.
Yeah,
I was on a scholarship. I was tasked to find my own place. And I eventually found a place that was near my university in Foggy Bottom. And honestly, like, I was like, Kahiga, he's like, yo, I've been living here, rental cap, for the last 2 years. I was like, okay, that's great. And I know, you know what? I don't take that away from him.
yes,
You know what? It is what it is. But he's a guy, and I'm like, I'm a woman. I don't even, he's like, yo, if you want to stay with me, you just, you need to know what's up here. I'm like walking into these apartment buildings. I'm like, people are crying, people are like screaming. I'm just like, where am I?
Yeah,
Yeah. But
yeah,
I
yeah,
love my guy, my
yeah.
kid.
No,
He
and
helped
and
me out.
that's
I had nowhere to stay.
that's even partly African culture community. We do help each other out, so that's something strong that we have. But getting back to that, I wanted to mention that even just I do think that there going back to the worldview on
Mhm.
Africa and again, I live in Sweden, so I live in a much smaller place than I would have lived in if I were in at home in Kenya, as an example. So there are these things that people take for granted, I think, in Europe, that this is the towns probably are smaller and narrower, and because of that you need to pack in much more people in smaller places, something like that. And the living conditions back home are very, very different. So you have the community, you have people who are happy, people just being happy. It's a more friendly atmosphere across the board, as opposed to the experience the experience in a lot of European countries. And I do think that speaks for a lot, because that has a lot to do with your well-being, your well-being as a human being, this ability to just talk to any person across the street, be helped by virtue of being a human being, not because anyone wants anything from you necessarily. I think that's something that's a little lost in the West and is very
Mhm.
rich in Africa, across Africa.
Uh-huh. So your question is?
No, it wasn't a question. It was just a comment. It was just a
I know,
comment.
I agree. I agree. I agree.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And I think that's it, really. I think that's it. I think we've touched on the topics that I had noted. Do you have something that you'd want to shout out, or to a last
Yeah.
thought that has come up? Come on, go on.
No, not necessarily shout out, but I love what you're doing. I think that's what I want to say.
Oh,
And I think you should keep, and you know what, you should speak to different people because everyone's experience is different. So, for example, with me, like I said, I've lived in so many different countries, but also have the African perspective that, from my perspective, I have a mix of, we've been in Africa, we left Africa, but we've come back to Africa, and I just have perspectives having worked in these different companies dealing with this continent. But if you need perspectives specific to certain countries, please, I would encourage that. And then, I can always debate these people.
yay! That is a
Yeah,
very good idea. I shall actually that's, I
yeah,
think, a very good
yeah,
idea. I'll
yeah.
take that
So
note and maybe
yeah,
see
and
that.
debate not meaning like,
Yeah, yeah.
being aggressive, just
Understood.
listening and maybe
Understood.
providing my perspective as well. That's all I'd like to
Oh,
say.
understood. Understood. This is really great, and I think I'd really, really, really love to have you back here. So we had the topic we initially were going to talk about. So
We went somewhere else, took hopefully my
we'll just
jacket off, everything, but no, but Asante
no.
Sana. Yeah.
Asante Sana as well, my dear. We really appreciate you being here. Viewers, we appreciate everyone who's been listening. Thank you. Thank you all, and
Thank
have a
you and
great
take
day.
care, and thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye bye.
Music by Atemi Oyungu. Content and production by me, Shiro. Get in touch at lostinourforties.com.